Hello, everyone. I'm Guadalupe Morelos. I'm in Boston. I'm Mexican.
Should I start also? Hello, everyone. I'm Greg. I'm also in Boston with Steve and Guadalupe and Josna. I'm so excited to meet you. And Rima, so it's just so awesome to see you, and we miss you dearly here in Boston. Guadalupe, Rima, and Steve lives north of Boston, so when we gather here, a lot of us that live in Boston have to drive north. So Guadalupe, Rima, and I shared many carpool rides together to narrative gatherings. So I miss those conversations dearly. But it's wonderful to see you and be here. Thanks.
Well, Rima, I don't know that there's more of a testimony to care than people getting up at 3:30 in the morning to be able to. So, Rima, would you mind going next?
Yeah, so I'm Rima, and I was born and raised in Dubai, and I've lived in Boston, where I've had the joy of meeting Steve, Greg, and Guadalupe during my decade of living there and training there before I came back here. And I recently got to meet with Jyotsna, at least virtually so far, but it has definitely been a joyful and meaningful meeting so far.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jyotsna, and I was born in India, was raised since the age of 6 outside of New York City, and then have been outside of the US for the last 15 years, living in India, Singapore, and now the UAE. I call myself a bit of a kind of reformed academic who, through narrative and somatic work, found a way to make meaning of my academic life, right, and have it be impactful. And I am just so grateful to have had the opportunity to discover Rima online in our various narrative conversations. And it's been a hugely spacious and expansive kind of unfolding that's happened, I think, in our conversations. And it's just, it's fortunate for me, though, that I'm also part of a conversation that's happening in Boston, because I'm in the midst of also coming back to the US this summer. And so to learn to start bridging that gap, right, and to start connecting with the narrative community in the US, especially because my daughter's going to start university in Boston. So I imagine I will be up there quite a bit. So it's, yeah, I'm thrilled to be part of all of this.
Oh, fantastic. That's, you'll definitely have to arrange for some time together, coffee. Yeah. Yes. What school is your...
She's going to Tufts. She's going to Tufts.
Oh, goodness. Wow. Quite impressive. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we had sort of thought about leaving this a bit open to just see where the conversation goes. And Greg and Guadalupe and I would be happy to sort of ask questions, if that's okay, and see, like I said, where things go. I know that in talking to Rima, because I get to talk to Rima pretty regularly, I felt a real delight in her voice when she told me about meeting you. And like it was, the image I had was, it was like nourishment of some kind. But Rima, I guess one question I have is, you know, if you might want to say a little bit more about what's been meaningful to you about meeting Jyotsna and developing this new relationship, even without having ever met in person. Would that be that be an okay place to start?
Yeah, I think I definitely love that. I mean, for one, I can say the timing in which we met, is very, I think it's interesting, Jyotsna, you're saying that the experience of us meeting virtually even has been an expansive experience for you. And I find interesting how this expansive meeting has happened in the context of a very constricting, heavy global time. And I have to say it, I myself, in my own heart, in Arabic, the word for heart is qalb, which means something that flips. It's constantly flipping. It's never meant to be in one place at any one time. So I find that, I've been flipping between states of expansion and contraction throughout this time, especially more so. And, so the timing has been interesting. We met, and I had, this time I've been increasingly being called to step outside of my comfort zone. And I was being called by, two different community organizations based in Dubai who are very concerned about the mental health effects of the pandemic. One is an online education for entrepreneurial women called Badri Academy, and they were asking me to do some videos and reflective questions that they can share with their students who are dealing with the pandemic. And the other one has been Tashkil, which is an arts-based organization, and they're very concerned about the effects of the pandemic on their creatives and artists that they serve. And they wanted, my input as a mental health counselor there. So while I agreed to those, I was collecting some, maybe brainstorming some like narrative-based questions that could be helpful in responding to the pandemic. And so I posted on a Facebook group that both me and, who so happens, Jyotsna were part of. And I was asking, I created a Google Doc and I was asking for people's input. And then Jyotsna literally comments like, "Oh, hi, I didn't know there's a fellow narrative comrade in UAE." I'm like, "Oh, hello." So that's how we connected, and we exchanged numbers from there. And I felt, my first reaction to that was, yes, Steve, as you said, as you observed in my voice, is such joy because, I've been back since, I'd say, August 2018, so, sometime, but still fairly newish back after a decade away. And the beginning, I found the transition back to be difficult. And, and even though there's a lot about the community I really value and deeply appreciate, I also found it difficult to connect with people, as effortlessly, and I find as much as I, value the mental health community here, I also find that there aren't many that are open to systemic or post-structural views of, I guess what we call mental health, right? And so just finding someone who speaks my language, I guess, has been such a joy. And also, but on top of it, even though we both have a relationship with narrative therapy, I don't think we see it as a jealous partner. I just love how in our conversations, we're not just talking about narrative therapy or mental health or psychology, but we're very, I feel like it just spans different parts of ourselves that we bring into the table. And that's what I at least experience as expansive.
I wonder if Greg or Guadalupe have any questions that have come to mind and after listening a bit.
Well, there's so many kind of images that I am thinking about and are playing around in my brain right now with listening to what you just say, Rima. But there is this interesting, for me, idea of your heart flipping so constantly in. So I'm wondering about the experience of meeting Josna in finding, the common language that you two speak in, and it's not only about mental health and psychology, but it's broader than that. And I'm just wondering about the experience of your heart,
Yeah, that's like I find that at least for me, right, like I find during our conversations, I do come out with lots of, I guess, possibilities, and that's where I would experience expansion. But of course, like the day-to-day grind may pile up into a contraction again, and maybe I may lose touch with that expansive quality. So I do appreciate that we both agreed to be a part of this conversation, because it can help us, at least help me, I'd say, stay in touch with this expansive quality, especially as Jyotsna is at the time of a major transition during this difficult time, as she has already mentioned. So it's a way of, I guess, honoring this gift, even though we never got to meet in person. So I think for me, it's not really about where my heart is right now, but more about, when I want to look back at this time, what do I want to be valuing and cherishing, and I think gratitude is definitely one, and it's I think this is an act of gratitude.
Thank you, Rima. It's beautiful, beautiful, very, just, very poetic. I just feel like I have a cloud in my brain, like lots of images. Thank you.
I think that I'm with Guadalupe. Like there's poeticness in what you're saying. It's like taking me in every direction, and maybe that's like this. I'm being infected with the expansiveness that you're talking about, and Joyce too. Like these spacious unfolding and expansive, and just spanning different parts of ourselves is what you're saying. Words you're using, and it's getting me to think of people as really, really big, and there's like so many possibilities of what it means to be a person. But this other thing you said, Rima, like I kind of resonated with, or you said in encountering Josna that you weren't experiencing her as a jealous partner.
Oh no, the narrative therapy. We weren't experiencing narrative therapy as a jealous partner.
Oh, okay. And so I was just wondering about that, like, and what you were experiencing it as, and what that, kind of might be saying about what is important to you in a relationship, like whether it be therapy or a person.
Well, one thing I noticed about coming back to Dubai, you see, Boston, it's a college town, right? So there are lots of people who are young and new in their careers, and it seems to be Boston has its own share of elitism and other things that are problematic, but one thing that I miss about there is how young talent is appreciated and welcome. Here I feel like we have a lot of young talent, but unfortunately I feel it's recent times you are seeing more businesses being owned by young people, opened by young people, which is great. And there's some more government support in that area. But I find that within specific industries, especially mental health, I find here that if you are young, you know, it's there's more, at least for me, I come out with more pressure of feeling like I need to prove myself to colleagues who are more senior to me. And whenever I meet with people on conferences here, I'm often asked, what is your quote unquote specialty? And, you know, and so these, you know, these expectations would invite a lot of self-doubt, which in turn would affect, you know, my relationship to my work as a result. So meeting people like Jyotsna, you know, it reminded me that, you know, we're in relationship to ideas. Ideas don't define us. You know, they don't have to colonize the rest of our being. You know, we're in relationship to ideas, and we bring different aspects of ourselves to these ideas, to manifesting these ideas. And I find it in my work with clients as well. You know, what clients appreciate about me is not necessarily what I know or my expert status, but rather my authenticity, which can only come with bringing my whole self into my work.
Jyotsna, I wonder where listening might be taking you to that you might like to speak to.
Listening is taking me to even more appreciation, even to kind of embedding me more in the gratitude of what this time is. And the heart flipping and the expansiveness and the contraction is in many ways also the gift of what narrative allows for me in this time, right? My own shift from my own kind of academic orientation towards narrative and a kind of more somatic therapeutic orientation was also the ability to see in the contraction the expansion, right? That the sparkling moment, right? The sparkling moment. And so in many ways, the relationship with Rima, right, was a real testimony to how narrative has been a real gift in my life, right, in terms of opening up so many possibilities and integrating the way in which Greg talks about how people are really big and that we have many ways to be a person. And I feel like narrative really allows for that. And then I think it kind of confirms some of what Rima was saying in terms of our relationship being about narrative and so much more, right? And so many of my professional interactions with narrative colleagues are always so much more, right? So it's really, so listening is taking me to the, you know, a fuller appreciation, a fuller acknowledgement of the choices I've made in my life over, you know, to transition into different, of being different kind person. It's also confirming for me the ways in which Rima is talking about her own experience to a kind of a mental health community and having to hold that expert status that she and I have talked about this a lot, about how when we are invited into that with narrative, we can also resist it much more easily than we might with other modalities. So it's not like Michael White and the 12 Apostles, right? We can kind of find another way of approaching narrative. And I know that has been really, really helpful for me in having these conversations with Rima and a few other narrative colleagues. So yeah, I think, you know, the listening has kind of deepened the choices I've made in my life, the risks I've taken, and the appreciation that extending oneself in these moments when there feels contraction, while could be difficult, also allows the heart to flip. And you know, those reminders of those many possibilities. And I just want to kind of add with, you know, one of the, I mean, I know you know this, you all know this as people who've known Rima as a colleague and as a professional, right, in the narrative field. But, you know, I'm also just deeply, deeply just sometimes blown away by the level of her quality of curiosity, right? Her ability to bring forward questions with such integrity and such grace, really. And there's just a real sincerity that, if I go back to Guadalupe's thing about what about this is the heart, for me, it always feels like she's coming from her heart. And that's a really, you know, that for me is also very, very important, because I think we have had conversations about how we want to continue to be a part of interactions with one another that aren't limited to the geography, right, of this place. And the ways in which that's happened is somewhat through poetry, right? And somewhat thinking about poetic registers as, in fact, an opportunity to bring other parts of ourselves into narrative conversation. So yeah, so listening brought me to all of those different places.
Greg or Guadalupe, would you like to?
Well, just now you want to tell us about how your experience of meeting Rima, how was it? You know, what are the maybe a little bigger stories that you want to share with us? That'd be nice.
Right, so I've been in the UAE for the last 3 years, right? And so, and in that time, the UAE has very strong professional ideas about who can practice in a mental health context. So I have a litany of degrees that don't let me do anything, right, in some ways. So I've been practicing, but I haven't really had a lot of community, right, support around that practice. So, you know, some online chats, but I've been pretty isolated here, right, and working with individuals. So when I saw Rima's name come up, right, in one of the narrative online forums, and I saw that she was in the UAE, it was like, oh, there's another comrade here, right? And so it was this real, you know, this sense of, you know, oh my God, we can build something. And I think Rima and I maybe share some of this energy where we like to build, we like to create, and we like to do it, you know, we kind of get enthusiastic about doing those things, not only in isolation, but with others. So I think that general orientation allowed us to kind of come together, right, in terms of I would say enthusiasm, right? And it was, and that enthusiasm had us starting to do weekly chats and talking about our lives and talking about interventions in work and responding to each other around questions of what we might have been uncomfortable with. Oh, I don't want to extend myself here. Is this okay? Or, right? I mean, a lot of care, a lot of enthusiastic care in our relationship. So for me, that was incredibly just gratifying and grounding, really, really grounding, and made me feel less alone. It made me feel really less alone in the practice here. So I'm hoping that before I leave, some version of social distancing will allow me to drive to Dubai and we will sit 6 feet across from each other, right? And right, and we'll actually have some physical proximity before I have to go, which is still, you know, there's still a few more weeks. So yeah, it was a really grounding, embedding, affirming process. And so, and I'm in a huge transition now where it's like, I'm leaving yet another place. I have to go to the US. I've done the narrative work from Dulwich, but I'm not licensed in the US, but I have a PhD and 2 masters. So I have to go back to school at 56 to do licensing, right? And so there's just like a million things, but it all feels I think especially with this relationship with Rima, it all feels very effortless now. It feels like I can walk through this and simply do it in the way that works for me, whatever that looks like. And that was, I think that has been also very affirming, because I think, if it's okay to say, Rima, I think what we have really allowed for between each other is to see how exactly what she says, that the relationship to ideas, we bring different aspects of ourselves, right? And manifesting those ideas. And I think affirming that for one another, I think has been very useful to our own professional identities.
Mm.
I just want to, share one of the things that you just say about Rima. It resonates so much with me and my experience meeting Rima the first time. This curiosity with such grace, is such a powerful ability that she shows, and it's very very spontaneous, I guess that's the word I'm looking for. It's so much part of her, so it's so nice to hear from somebody else that you have noticed that too. Yeah, thank you for that.
And I just add, it's spontaneous, but like one of the most rigorous thinkers I have encountered, right? So that the spontaneity just has depth, right? In terms of an ability to just stay with something, right? And really find in it so many different opportunities.
Man, it's hard to pick even a single sentence of yours to single out. One thing is you're generating for me, and what you're allowing us into your relationship is generating for me a whole new experience or a whole new concept of what it means to be living or coming from the heart, coming from your heart. And it just, I'm curious, if what from your life, Josna, would have you being really receptive to someone who is so coming from the heart? What would have you picking up on that and really valuing that? Any stories from your life or histories that?
Oh yeah. The entire American academic establishment rejects the heart.
Yes.
And I was deeply entrenched in that as I did my PhD at Ivy League institution, and then taught at an Ivy League institution, and then went into a tenured position. And, everything about that was not about my heart. And it took me about a decade. It took me about a decade to find an integration between this and this and this, right? And so, yeah, there are just so many stories that come out of being a woman of color in the academy, getting a PhD in the 1990s when post-coloniality, I was Spivak student, right? I mean, we're post-colonial, postmodernism. I was at Columbia, right? This was like the hotbed of it. So, I did Indian history, subaltern studies was coming out in the 90s, right? So I was deeply in these discussions. And while I believe those discussions had very important political interventions that they were making, I didn't feel it was from the heart. And I think that's why when I discovered Michael's work, right, and it felt like this moment of integration, right, for me, and it was really interesting because I discovered Michael's work also after spending about 6 years really trying to get outside of my head and spending a lot of time in yoga and meditation and somatic practices. And I think that prepared me to go back into those ideas, right, to see the heart possibilities. So it was like I had to untrain, right, and then retrain, and then open up, right, and so. So now for me, I think that heart-centered approach is so, it is how I am hoping to be in relationship to the ideas, right, that come into my life. And it's also, I think because I'm also older, right, and coming into mental health and therapeutic stuff at a different stage, I also feel more able to challenge some of the kind of professional boundaries that people have set up between client and therapist, and being more comfortable with that in a way that I don't think I might have, like I couldn't have challenged certain things as a graduate student or a young assistant professor. But by the time you're like 56, you're like, whatever, right? And the clients who want to work will work, and those people, other people won't, right? And I can choose which communities to be a part of. So yeah, so academia was definitely the biggest story that I had to undo and resist. And the way I did that was to pivot towards a kind of somatic and heart-centered rendering, which accounted for the intelligence, but didn't make it the primary orientation. That took about 2 decades. That took 2 decades.
Rima, I'm just wondering, what does this have you, what are you resonating with? Where is this taking you? And anything you're relating to that's particularly meaningful?
There's a lot. One that immediately comes to mind is I feel, and actually coincidentally, me and Jyotsna were actually, in our last conversation, we were talking about the pleasantries of greetings and departures. But I'm going to tie it in here a bit, and I noticed that in many cultures around the world, right, and including here in the UAE and this region, right, a lot of conversations are built upon pleasantries, especially in the Arabic language. There's no way you can speak any Arabic dialect without it being filled with pleasantries, sometimes a lot of pleasantries. And I've been trying to reassess my relationship with these pleasantries on my own. Like, how much of it do I experience as genuine hospitality versus, that's grounded in the culture, but from a genuine place of hospitality versus just mere pleasantry just to fill the silence, just for the sake of it, or just to praise somebody, but it's not coming from the heart. And what I'm appreciating from what all of you have shared, about what you've been appreciating about me is that, I do find myself wishing that pleasantries can go on that level of depth, where it's mixed with curiosity, where it's mixed with grounding this observation in an actual experience. So it's more heart-based, it's not just praising or pleasantry just for the sake of it, and that's not experienced as authentic or as connecting. So that's one place where it's taking me, is that. Then the second piece that stood out to me is about academia and it not being heart-centered. I definitely totally agree with that. And I would also add that, my experience of how social justice is spoken about in the West, like in many ways, it opened up my eyes to a lot of things, but in other ways, I feel like it also goes away from the heart. Especially in academic spaces, it's not heart-centered. It's not centering relationships. It's centering who is right, who is wrong, who is oppressed, who is not oppressed, versus the original intention was about critiquing systems and dominant stories that are hurting all of us in different ways at different levels. So, you know, I'm definitely resonating with, you know, moving from a heart center and flowing out from the heart center, not in a way to dismiss what's difficult, not in a way to sugarcoat what's difficult, but rather to approach it with more courage. And the word courage in English comes from, I think it was a Latin word, I forget, that means coming from the heart, you know, so it needs to come from the heart.
I think there was some references to poetic language and poetry earlier. And I guess I find myself curious about how you would describe the importance of poetry in supporting this heart-centered stance.
Is it okay if I say something, Rima?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So this project of, you know, greetings and departures, right, is something that I started with Tiffany in Calgary, because we were so uncomfortable with the ways in which people were talking about stay safe. Everything was about safety. And the safety had a kind of vigilance associated with it, and that internalized our personal responsibility in relationship to what was going on. And so there was this kind of policing, right, that you were supposed to do against something which you didn't even have any ability, right, to actually respond. And while we appreciated that safety was a part of being able to survive, right? What we noticed is what we really wanted was care, right? We wanted, how would we foreground care, right? In the ways in which we were meeting one another and leaving one another, right? So I think this is where, you know, with Rima and I were talking about, like, where does that come from when we can really bring ourselves to meet the person in front of us, right? And even if it's maybe we're not fully ready, right? Because sometimes you need the fillers. Sometimes the how are you is your how are you, right? We're not fully ready to go there, right? But we can at least meet this person with a level of care and attention. And, you know, in having those conversations that I was having with Tiffany, we were thinking, do we want to write something? And we noticed also that one of the things that this time was demanding was immediate responses, right? Write something right away, put it out, right? Find a way. And what we asked ourselves was, actually, maybe is there more time than we're acknowledging in terms of our ability to respond? And in fact, could we slow it down? Could we in fact slow it down? Because these conversations don't need to all happen at once. And we will come back to things. So I think that for me, Stephen, is where the poetic, you know, came in. And then we thought of it as the poetry of greetings and departures, because it's that liminality, right? It's that space in between that doesn't have an already known understanding, right? And one of the most brilliant of the young poets is Ocean Vuong, right? And Ocean Vuong's like, who's this young Vietnamese, right, queer poet who didn't even learn English till the age of 11, right? And then now writes in English, right? In this very poetic register, because the language has taken on a really embodied resonance, right? It's not you know, while incredibly brilliant, it is not defined out of a kind of classically intellectual register. So I think it was in those conversations between, you know, with Tiffany and then with Rima, and thinking about the poetry of greetings and departures, and how we might even want to wait and take some time to even reflect on our own relationship to them. And actually then not even write anything right away, right? So we had this like Google Doc where we could just add things to, and maybe we'll come back to it, right? In a way that's an invitation, as opposed to a demand of an argument that one must make in the context of what's happening right now, right? And so that's where the poetry was a way to respond that gave us time, that actually gave us time to actually feel and, embody, and then have the capacity to respond from different parts of ourselves.
Can I add something to that, Jyotsna? So I'm actually recalling one separate conversation we were having when I think I was telling you, it was kind of, after I had done all these videos that I was mentioning about for these community organizations, and I was saying how, man, I'm just tired about saying the same things, talking about the same things. Like, how much more can we talk about emotional health and social distancing, or what some people want to call physical distancing instead. So I was getting tired, And then you said something on the lines of how, I think that, I'm sure that you as a poet can probably relate to the idea of time. I can't remember the exact words you said, but something along the lines of how kind of with time, we kind of interpret and experience and re-experience a poem in different ways. And people digest things in so many different ways and through different mediums. So it invited me to question, okay, so what if I'm repeating myself? What's the big deal?
I remember that. I remember the conversation. It was your belief that you were saying the same thing, right?
Yes.
And then, I asked if it would be okay to notice that maybe you're saying the same thing doesn't mean the same thing to those who hear it, right? That listening, one person's listening is not another person's listening. And that as a poet, you might resonate with that because, right, we hear and, experience poetry, right, differently at different times in our own life.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, Jyotsna, you've given me a gift. I've always struggled to know how to have a personal relationship with poetry, and now it's linked to space and time for me as a result of listening to you, and that's really appealing to me. So I want to thank you for that. Greg or Guadalupe, any questions, reflections?
I thought we were waiting for Rima to answer your question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, what was your question? I forgot, but maybe Rima didn't forget.
Right, so more about the poetry part, or?
Yes.
Yes. So, well, yeah, I guess one other thing I would add is, poetry is, I think already Jyotsna mentioned, it's a liminal space, right? And I think it's it's a space where the boundaries between different images, different senses, different disciplines even are blurred. I think especially when you're thinking about poetry today and how it is expressed, and there's a spontaneity and yet a depth, right, to poetry. It doesn't have to be I think it's for me, it's a way of being rather than, oh, I'm a poet and I write and I publish and blah blah. It's more, I feel like we, to me at least, I feel like we all have some poetic way of being. Maybe for some of us it expresses itself in actual writing. For others it expresses itself in a different way. But for me it's just a way of seeing the world, a way of being, a way of being inspired, a way of being moved by things, but not restricting, with these artificial boundaries between these things. And that's where the liminality comes in. I'm not sure if that quite answers the question.
I was thinking about something that somebody said in the last hour about clouds, right? And the ways in which people are connecting to nature right now, right? And so that's again, Stephen, like the slowing down, right? The witnessing, you know, noticing the way the light hits the wall in your room, right? Because you're sitting in your rooms much longer, or right in certain parts of your house, right? And that way in which you're able to experience the same things differently just because your relationship to the space and time has shifted.
Yes, I'm quite moved by that, because that's definitely the way I experience poetry as a state of being, whether as literal poetry or as an actual way of being, a way of living life. And actually, you know, when we read the Japanese haiku, and that was the way, when you read some of them at first, you think, okay, how is this poetry? You know, it's just describing what's there. But then when you really sit with it and take time with it, you know, despite the brevity and how simple the words are, it's actually so much more, and it's so much to savor within that, and that, you know, allowing the poem to unfold and allowing the moment to unfold. I think that's where I think that's where the poetry lies.
And that for me was a big part of the shift from academia towards narrative, right? Was in fact that liminality, right? Was to go into a much more embodied relationship to even ideas. And then I think, Rima, you and I have talked about this a lot, when we're invited back into performative ways of being narrative, right? How in some senses we limit our own poetic register because we're not actually in the seat in the way in which we might want to be in the seat, right? Ideas of how we need to be in relationship to those ideas of Michael, right? You know, and so when you slow it down, even with your in a professional context, if you invite in the poetry, right, of space and time and gesture, right, what suddenly opens up, right? Just taking your time, right? Taking your time, and it kind of goes back to how much our work is so embodied, because when there is the silence, the rush to find the right question, right?
Yes.
As opposed to the leaning back and waiting, right? And waiting for an invitation maybe to come from somewhere else.
Yes.
Wow, thank you so much. You know, I feel like there were lots of doors of possibilities opening for me, and in my thinking, in my reflection of what is going on right now, and me trying to make sense of the injustices that that we are experiencing, and moving away from just centering my reflections on, you know, finding somebody to blame for the losses that we are experiencing, and connecting me to values of humanity, connection, compassion for each other. And I'm thanking you because when you talk about these spaces, between spaces of spaces in time, spaces in a space too, you know, and it's a poetic language, I guess, you know, that helps me to reflect, and help me to endure the times of losses that I'm experiencing right now. So thank you for that.
I mean, if I could just add to some of that really resonates for me too, Guadalupe. And I think I've heard you both be given such beautiful language, and the word depth keeps coming up in this conversation, and with the expansiveness. But I've also felt like you've both spoken to how, in order to achieve, like, you both value living deeply or this depth a lot, and it seems like your relationship enhances it for each other, or allows you to go there, the expansiveness or the depth. But it's also, I've also heard you speak that it requires resistance to things. Like, Justin, you were saying how much resistance you've had to summon to resisting, like it took decades to resist and unlearn the academic discourses and pressures. And Rima, you're this thing of like not restricting with artificial boundaries, and the resistance you both are, I think, are speaking to, or I hear you speaking to with poetry, about resistance to rushing, or resistance to filling in space or going too quickly, what it takes to stay in the like liminal space. But you're alongside the heart imagery. It just feels, for me, it's just giving, it makes it so, it makes that resistance, it really clarifies how much that resistance like has to offer. Like if we're able to resist, how much beauty like is awaiting when we can like slow down and resist, and not jump to, you know, not just get caught up in just pleasantries, but really meet a person, right? Like slow down and really kind of summon what it takes to really meet someone, and how sacred that can be. So I will be rewatching this to hang out in between the spaces, and I think even when I rewatch it, it'll give new meanings to me that I'm looking forward to. And I cannot thank you both enough for allowing us into your relationship. Like it's so, you know, I'm having that feeling like Greg, you don't really kind of know what this conversation means. I'm always starting to know what it means. And I look forward to like that, my relationship with this conversation unfolding. So thank you.
Yeah, I resonate with that. I will definitely be listening back on this, especially since I was pulled in a couple different directions at the end with some of my other responsibilities. But I wonder if Rima and Jyotsna, you could just, as we come to an end, say, you know, what this experience has been like for you to have this conversation, and if it were to be an event in your relationship, how you might name that event, like that describe this moment in the ongoing development of your relationship.
Yeah, I guess I could start. I mean, I definitely re-experienced expansion and depth. And I think also one place that takes me is maybe another possible relationship with contraction, where it's like, oh, there's a lot to process that can be contracting too. But then in just leaning into that contraction, taking time with it, can allow it to unfold. You know, as you know, I think Jyotsna, you said extending oneself during contracting times, you know, and I had to write that down, because like I also appreciate, you know, Jyotsna's use of poetic language, you know, even with her academic background, and I can see how far she's come in, you know, questioning that academia, even though yes, it is a part of her, you know, and there's value she gains from it, but there's also an expansion to other realms, the poetic realms, for example, the somatic realms, the heart-based realms. And that, I think, you know, inspires me, and, you know, it regrounds me in that. And it can be a way I can continue to respond to self-doubt in whatever circle I'm in. Because there's a lot of resistance out there about taking time. You know, oh, we need quick results. We need this now. This is urgent. And to some degree, I can empathize with that. You know, I think especially if you've been dealing with pain for such a long time, you know, you would want anything to get out of this pain, you know? And, but I also see there's a major cost and more pain in rushing as well. You know, so I've been inspired by ways to think about time and to think about silence and to think about leaning in. And I definitely, you know, whether or not we get to see each other in person, whether with social distancing or without social distancing, you know, it's, I still definitely want to continue this relationship because, you know, I don't think any of us can grow or stay connected to resilience without each other, without having community. And Steve, you've been one of the people who have constantly reminded me how we are relational beings. We don't live in bubbles, you know, we are relationships, you know, our identity is relationships. And I think my relationship with Jyotsna also keeps me grounded in that.
So I'll just, if I had to call this event something, it would be something like patient celebrations, right? And kind of if it's a you know, a patient celebration, I'm like Greg, probably I'm not really fully yet sure of what this conversation yet means. But I am really grateful that Rima has extended my capacity to be in relationship with all of you now, especially as I kind of cross these waters. So you know, I feel like, and that will take time. And in that time, I'm looking forward to, yeah, what unfolds, right, in qualities of our own capacities. So thank you.
Well, we look forward to your arrival.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Greg, Guadalupe. What a treat. What a treasure of an hour. So the wave is about to leave the United Arab Emirates and head towards Russia.
Oh, wave. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.